Hello, I'm Michael Wunsch. I'm the plant pathologist at the North Dakota State University Carrington Research Extension Center. This is the second of a four-part video series in which I discuss the integrated management of Aphanomyces and Fusarium root rot in field peas. In this video, we'll be discussing fungicide seed treatment. Now, this is the abbreviated version of this video in which I only give major conclusions without a detailed explanation. Funding was granted by the Northern Pulse Growers Association for this research in conjunction with the North Dakota Department of Agriculture's Pesticide Harmonization Registration Board and the USDA Specialty Crop Block Grant Program administered by the North Dakota Department of Agriculture. The funding from these sources made this research possible. In another video, I discussed planting date as a tool for managing Aphanomyces and Fusarium root rot in field peas. In that video, I describe how early planting is a very important tool and a highly effective tool for sharply mitigating the losses to Aphanomyces and Fusarium root rot in field peas. Now, one of the side effects, though, of early planting is that obviously in those cooler soils, you're going to have more risk of losses to Pythium and Rhizoctonia. Now, Pythium and Rhizoctonia are easily managed with fungicide seed treatments, and what we have observed in these fields with elevated Aphanomyces and Fusarium root rot pressure is that we often have quite a bit of Pythium and Rhizoctonia pressure, and we very often see very strong responses to fungicide seed treatment in these fields. From 2017 to 2020, we ran planting date studies in Carrington and at several on-farm sites in western North Dakota. And the on-farm sites were long-term no-till. Carrington was either conventional till or direct seeded, but the results all sorted by soil temperature. And what we saw is that when the soils were cool, especially when they were lower than 50 degrees Fahrenheit in the first 7 days after planting, we saw a very strong response to fungicide seed treatment. The bar graph gives the average results across all studies in which we evaluated the response to fungicide seed treatment in that range of soil temperatures, and the scatter plot shows the response in an individual study at that soil temperature to the fungicide seed treatment. And what you can see is that when soils were less than 50 degrees Fahrenheit, we saw a 3 to 5.6 bushel response to fungicide seed treatment with a fungicide seed treatment obvious that has very good efficacy against Pythium and Rhizoctonia. In 2024, we did more testing, in this case across 11 fields in Carrington that had different levels of Aphanomyces and Fusarium root rot pressure and 4 planting dates. Okay, and we did this testing on 2 different field pea varieties, and shown here is the combined results across those 2 field pea varieties. What we saw is that, again, in those cool soils, we saw a very strong response to fungicide seed treatment with obvious. In this case, between 2 and 2.6 bushels an acre, and in the very cool soils, less than 50 degrees Fahrenheit, is where we saw the 2.6 bushel an acre average gain from the fungicide seed treatment. In 2024, we also did comparative efficacy testing of fungicide seed treatments, and we found that this response to fungicide seed treatment was not limited to obvious. What you can see here is that Vibrance Total, which is a Syngenta product that represents a combination of Vibrance Max pulses plus a new Pythium product called Viantis, that Vibrance Total performed equally or better than obvious at the various soil temperatures. And we were seeing a yield response between 5.8 and 7.6 bushels an acre in soil temperatures below 50 degrees Fahrenheit with the fungicide seed treatment. Now, this is testing conducted against 6 field pea varieties and 2 fields and 4 planting dates. So we've just discussed the response to fungicide seed treatment with obvious and Vibrance Total, products from BASF and Syngenta that have excellent efficacy against Pythium and Rhizoctonia and some degree of efficacy against Fusarium, but that are traditionally not considered Fusarium products per se. What about fungicide seed treatment with a product that has excellent efficacy against Pythium, Rhizoctonia, and Fusarium? What our results indicate is that adding an active ingredient with activity against Fusarium can increase the yield gain conferred by the fungicide when planting into warm soils, but that the yield gain conferred by that fungicide in those warm soils is not enough to compensate for the loss in yield potential associated with planting into warmer soils under Aphanomyces and Fusarium root rot pressure. Here are results from testing we conducted from 2017 to 2020 in Carrington and at those on-farm sites with a mixture of fungicides from Bayer that has excellent efficacy against Pythium, Rhizoctonia, and Fusarium. Proline in this case is the Fusarium product. What you see here is that the yield gain conferred by the fungicide remained very strong even as the soils got warm, as opposed to Obvious or Vibrance Total, where that yield gain started to taper off. But if you look at the average yields, you'll see that even though we got this excellent response to the fungicide seed treatment when planting into warm soils, that gain was not enough to compensate for the reduction in yield potential associated with planting into very warm soils. We did more testing in 2024. In this case, we tested Obvious alone versus Obvious plus BASF's Fusarium product called Relania. And what you can see here is that in this case, actually, the addition of the Fusarium product did not improve our yields at any level of disease pressure. I'd have to see this again to be confident in these results, but in this case, it looked like the Fusarium product did not help us in any situation. What about Vibrance Total? Well, Syngenta also sells a Fusarium product that you can add to one of their standard fungicide seed treatments. And that product for field peas is called Trebucet. When we added Trebucet to Vibrance Total, we saw no gain when the soil temperatures were cold, which is not surprising because Fusarium is not very active at those temperatures. But we did see a gain to adding it when the soil started to warm up. The problem was exactly what we saw with the Bayer products. Yes, adding the Fusarium product improves the consistency of the yield gain conferred by the fungicide seed treatment as soils warm up. But you can't compensate for the reduction in yield potential associated with planting into very warm soils under Aphanomyces and Fusarium pressure with the seed treatment. So it'll mitigate your losses by planting a little bit late, but it's not enough to make up for the difference. Really, the answer is that you need to plant early and use a fungicide seed treatment targeting Pythium and Rhizoctonia. So what about adding a fungicide seed treatment efficacy against Aphanomyces? There is such a seed treatment registered for use on field peas. The active ingredient is called ethoboxam. We tested it as the standalone product called Intego Solo. What we found is the exact same thing that we saw with adding Fusarium products. In this case, what you see is the base seed treatment versus that same base seed treatment plus ethoboxam. The base seed treatment was either Obvious or it was a product from Bayer called Evergol Energy. The base seed treatment had great efficacy against Pythium and Rhizoctonia, but no efficacy against Aphanomyces. When we added Intego Solo, the active ingredient ethoboxam, to that base seed treatment, we saw no yield gain to adding the ethoboxam when the soil temperatures were cool. Not surprising, because in cool soil temperatures, Aphanomyces is not very active. Once the soils warmed up, however, we did see a yield gain to adding the ethoboxam. The problem is that yield gain was not enough to compensate for the reduction in yield potential associated with planting late. At best, we broke even. If you look at your average yield gains, you see that we never achieved higher yields with ethoboxam than early planting with just the base seed treatment. So again, okay, up to now we've been discussing the returns to fungicide seed treatment in fields with a long history of pea and/or pea and lentil production and elevated Aphanomyces and Fusarium root rot pressure. I often get the question, can I expect a similar return to the fungicide seed treatment in a field that does not have a long history of pea and lentil production and does not have elevated Aphanomyces and Fusarium pressure? We have not addressed that question as rigorously as the first, but the limited data we have collected would suggest exactly what everyone would expect. If you don't have quite as long a history of pea and lentil production and you don't have the Aphanomyces and Fusarium root rot, you're also unlikely to have the same level of Pythium and Rhizoctonia pressure, and you're unlikely to see as strong a response to fungicide seed treatment. We conducted the first assessment of this, unfortunately not against naked seed. Instead, what we compared was the response to fungicide seed treatment with the legions targeting Pythium alone versus Evergol Energy, which has the metalaxyl for Pythium management as well as active ingredients for Rhizoctonia and Fusarium management. We conducted an assessment of the return to Allegiance versus Evergreen Energy in fields that did not have a long history of P and lentil production versus fields that did have a long history of P and lentil production. And what you can see from the wilted plants data is that these were fields with low Aphanomyces cerevisiarum pressure versus fields with elevated pressure. What you can see from the yield data is that in the fields with low Aphanomyces cerevisiarum root rot pressure, we also apparently had low Pythium and Rhizoctonia pressure because we saw very little response to the fungicide seed treatment. Conversely, in the fields with elevated Aphanomyces cerevisiarum pressure, we saw a strong response to fungicide seed treatment. And this is in very cool soils. Look at the soil temperature ranges there. And thus, you can conclude that the response to the fungicide seed treatment is because of elevated Pythium and Rhizoctonia in these same fields. We also did some testing in Williston in 2023 and 2024 in fields that had very low root rot severity. If you look at the root rot severity on this chart that summarizes the results across 2 field P varieties and 5 different studies conducted across 2 different years, you can see that the root rot severity was extremely low. Yes, seed treatment reduced the root rot severity, but you're talking about a reduction from 3% severity down to 1% severity. These are very low levels. As you would expect, the yield gained from the fungicide seed treatment was basically 0. Okay, under that very low levels of root rot severity, you don't see much of response to fungicide seed treatment. That should be obvious. With that, I thank you for your time and attention, and I thank again the funding sponsors that made this research possible. The Northern Pulse Growers Association, these are your checkoff dollars, and the North Dakota Department of Agriculture's Pesticide Harmonization Registration Board, and USDA Specialty Crop Block Grant Program administered by the North Dakota Department of Agriculture. Thank you very much.